India's economy getting to where it is now, being the 5th largest economy, which are now going to be the big focus areas for you to move India from being the 5th largest economy further up the ladder, maybe to the 3rd, because in power purchase parity, we already are the 3rd. Clearly, we're headed for growth, bigger growth than most others at this moment, and that is quite clear. But the question will be about the balance within the economy, which portions get more attention and which ones get moderated, because a challenge has been thrown out by the Prime Minister for India to be a developed nation by time we turn 100. And I think it's a wonderful way to look at India. So where is your big focus going to be now?
I think the driver would be engaging the youth power. So sectors which have great potential for engaging them, and when I say youth, I mean youth with all sets of skills. You can start from the bottom to the top, which speaks about frontier technology related skills, innovative skills, or STEM sciences skills, or it can just be very, at the bottom, skilled, not so skilled workers. So when you're planning for the Indian economy for the next 25 years, which we are calling Amrit Kal, and PM has highlighted champion sectors will be the ones with which we start off. But the first litmus test would be how would it benefit the workforce? Some at the leadership level and some at the bottom, or some in the middle. But people come out of universities, colleges, schools with different sets of skills. All of them need prospects for the future. And in that prospect is where the next 25 years is going to be geared. So that will be the testing measure. But otherwise, of course, I will stretch the argument a bit more, not so much to make it a tenuous argument, but it is a fact that 3-4 years ago, when in Davos all of us heard Industrial Revolution 4.0, Web 3, IoT, artificial intelligence, I'm happy to say that India in the last 3-4 years has actually built its capacities on these. Today, if India is showing the way on digital payments, digital influence into your medical practice, setting up of 75 digital derived centers of learning, setting up of 75 digital banking. 75 is because we want to also remember that it happened in the 75th year of independence. The digitization, the rapid influence of digitization, even in areas like agriculture. So we've shown the way since after what we heard in Davos. So that is, I think, the kind of direction. Move it more towards digitization, even more, and also make sure the workforce participation is at its maximum.
So let me take two comments, two things you mentioned. One is labor policy. How do we get more people sustainable economic opportunities? How do we ensure that the system is fair and encouraging of jobs? Because we have had this challenge, probably the single biggest challenge for us as a nation is to ensure the standard of living for all Indians. And I would imagine more than anything else, that's one thing we have to address. But of course, we have to address it through growth. That's the only positive way to do this. So is there a tweak or a change required in our policy to encourage more hiring and better compensation and better work conditions?
Well, if I take the example of the PLI, the Productivity Linked Incentive Scheme, one of the things was, as much as we looked at every addition to the production, every unit in addition that you produce, and at that scale, we were also looking at what will be the impact on our labor force. And when we are talking about MSMEs, that's large, but when we are talking about MSMEs on the other end of the spectrum, we are looking at in situ solutions for MSMEs who have wherever they are, because locally, they are the ones who give training, they are the ones who are going to be able to employ locally as much as collectively, if you think, as the large-scale units. So the policy has necessarily underlined the importance of labor and engagement of labor, and that's where we think we are pushing technology, digitalization, as much as we are pushing opportunities for work.
You're right. We will need to work on both ends. On the top end, we need to become global leaders, for sure. There's not even an option for many of our sectors, and we have some big leaders here, sitting here, who run global companies, who have demonstrated what India can do. Indians themselves have already led so many global enterprises, so individual capability is not an issue. So it is probably the tweak that's required, systemic, is also in the work environment, I think, on both. The other comment you made, or let me stick to PLI for a moment. Chinese companies have gone and done things in manufacturing without fear of actually having made losses, because it in one way or the other gets made up by the government system, whether it's through hidden subsidies or through loans which continue to be non-performing loans. As you know, their percentage of non-performing loans is about the highest in the world. And do you believe the PLI will compensate enough for a whole variety of Indian businesses now to be globally leading? Because it has to be globally competitive first to become globally leading. Do you think that scheme, because the result is yet to be seen, we've only got one company that's been currently cleared for the scheme. Hopefully many more will get cleared in the coming weeks and months. Is that enough, or is there other things we need to do to remove some of this fear people had of getting into manufacturing over the last decade or so? We saw a little bit of a climb, then we saw a bit of a decline, as you know. Now, and it is necessary. Of course, service is wonderful, but we cannot only be a services nation. We have to have a good spirit of agriculture, services, and manufacturing.
You're right in saying we'll have to see how it goes on the PLI, because only one has come and so on. But equally, I'm hearing a lot more companies who are moving out of China, wanting to come because they find the policies a lot more attractive, not just the PLI, but overall the ecosystem is now far more facilitative of such companies coming out to locate themselves in India. If that is one of the things. The second, I think, no policy can be the end to itself. It's not as if we've given a solution and that's the end of the story. It keeps evolving as we go on. So that applies even to those industries which are coming into the sunrise sector, for which we've given the policy support through an incentive. But if it's not sort of impertinent to say this now, I equally would want to know from the Indian industry, what is it that they are hesitant about even further? Since 2019, when I've taken charge of the finance ministry, I've been hearing, though the industry doesn't think it's conducive. All right, bring the rate down. All right, tax rate was brought down. And I keep defending industry, private sector, where even provocatively people have asked, what would you want to tell the private sector? We will do everything to get industry coming and investing here. Give PLI, we've given PLI. I want to hear from the Indian Inc. What's stopping you? When countries and industries abroad think this is the place to be in now, at this time, FDIs are coming, FPIs are coming, it's all, the stock market is so confident, Indian retail investor believes in them. Is it like Hanuman? You don't believe in your own capacity, in your own strength, and has there got to be somebody, standing next and say, hey, you're Hanuman, do it. And who's that person who's going to tell the Hanuman? It can't certainly be the government.
Maybe that's a role you have as well. How do you see the growth taking place? What do you think is the possibility right now for allowing India to take advantage of a difficult global situation? Because we are at this moment better off. We are not where we need to be because we still have work to do. but we're clearly better off. So is there some plan that you have or guidance for this system and put out an expectation from the industry and the players of the economy as to what can we hope to see in India in the next 6 months to a year?
I'm going to take off at a point which probably wouldn't be the expected answer.
Okay.
Now, I'm glad that the PM is talking about the kartavya bhav. You know, sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas, but sabka prayas. I think all of us will have to start doing what we can best do. Of course, infusing in it a certain seva bhav. We are doing it for the country. But of course, I learn my profit. I'll have my own income. All that is fine. But time has come that each one do a bit. Who, after all, started the startup movement? It was the young boys and girls. Haven't they come out saying, we'll be here, we'll show what we can, and then, of course, started saying, wouldn't it be better for you all to give us some support? So, if they could prove it, even despite the pandemic, within 2-3 years, since 2015, PM's support has been upfront for the startups. So I think it's time now to show a prowess, each one of us for ourselves. And that itself will give the creative momentum. Again, sorry for being referring to stories or mythology or Indian epics.
But that's us, so please
I was very glad to hear you talk of it. Ours as a civilization. It's been in us for a millennia. Haven't we heard of the story of the several birds, all of them on the floor, being deceived by a hunter by throwing a net on it? Each bird tried to get out of it but couldn't. But how did they all get out? By collectively flying on the spot in such a way the momentum was acquired and they lifted off with the net on them. Isn't that a story that all of us will have to look at? Each one may feel powerless, but together, if the will, Jana Manas, if all our Manas says, look, this country has to be somewhere else, but not here, this country includes us. So I would think it's the time to get unfettered in the areas that we are and lift like that flock of birds. Hunter be damned, I'm taking your net and all and I'm flying off. That's the time for India today now. And which place a better place than Mindmine Summit to talk about it?
Absolutely. So therefore, do you think it's time for India to start talking capital convertibility? At one point, and interestingly, the Reserve Bank governor made a statement. I don't remember if it was in a private conversation or a public statement. I think it's not an event. He said it's a journey. So are we expecting or hoping to see some steps, because that is part of our internationalization as well? On the one hand, lowering some of the import duties, that might help with some of the inflation. And on the other hand, looking at 1 or 2 more steps towards capital account convertibility. Are we ready for that?
See, I'm sure you observe government on the Reserve Bank and the various steps that they're taking over the period, and also infer for yourself as to where this is going. What is this attempt now in having rupee trade? It's not the ruble rupee which was of the old format. Now this formulation, which I'm glad the RBI has come up at a time which was so critical, we are seeing interest coming from so many different countries, all of which think, yes, it's possible to trade in, say, rupee, and those are significant points of transactions, and in a way is opening the Indian economy a lot more than what it can imagine to be. So if that is one milestone, may not be that milestone which you would have predicted in the old pre-pandemic India. Now, post-pandemic India is coming up with so many out-of-the-box solutions. Although there are still some who would only, pick up on the old example and say, would you do this? Would you do that? Would you? No. The solutions are also new solutions. And as a result, I would like to highlight the fact that we are lots more open with the Indian economy, lots more open in the way we are talking to countries. We are willing to have our digital platforms become interoperable between countries to enable cross-border transactions. So there are several tools which didn't exist earlier, through which Indian economy is getting opened up. So I want to have these beads which are getting into the string in your conversation. And that's actually making India a lot more surprise the world, but be there with them. So those are worth studying.
Absolutely. So tax to GDP ratio is up, GST collections are up, revenues overall are up. So lots and lots of good news on that front. These numbers, however, are of averages or of macro numbers. On the micro, however, we still have challenges. And unfortunately, those challenges at this moment exist mostly in small industry or highly labor-oriented activities. And those are the ones which continues to suffer in some sense, still not recovered since the start of the COVID. And that, I think, is something that deserves some kind of attention. And again, I'm not only talking on a subsidy basis, but a supportive system to get them on track for growth. Because there is growth in India at this moment. We are uniquely positioned. If you look objectively around the globe, we are one of the very few large countries which can see 25 or 30 years of secular growth ahead of us. Of course, we'll see some ups and downs, but it seems reasonably clear that we will have a growth path. We put in all the building blocks in the last 10 or 15 years or 20 years in India. And we are now putting in the additional riders which will help accelerate this growth. Do you see us going back to the 10+% growth in the coming years?
Well, it's very difficult for me to predict on specific numbers. But people who are in the job of predicting future, particularly those in business, like for instance the recent Morgan Stanley report, has unhesitatingly said 7 being the average, India will consistently grow at that kind of a number. So those are words coming from people who are normally critical and critically appraise economies. But one point on which I'll go back is what are the kind of ways in which we can support small industries and so on. Even as I do that, and I would seek your indulgence because I'm picking up on issues which are not otherwise meant to be picked up, but mine. So I'm also mining my thoughts and coming out. Now, support to the MSMEs. And I know I'm treading in a dangerous landmine-riddled area. Support to the MSMEs is not just what government can give. It is certainly largely dependent on that. But I'll take an example where all of you all can equally help. Look, we created from the government the TREADS platform. We wanted payments to go to the MSMEs in due time and not be delayed. And there was a time when, there was public, there was a figure floating around in the public saying it's probably to the extent of 10 lakh crores. Indicating probably all the 10 lakh is due from the government. Has spent a lot of time going through it. Yes, of course, government, some state government, some public sector undertaking under the center, and some public sector undertaking under the states. But I was surprised to find a considerable due payment, pending payments were also from the big industries. Now, is this just a data that I've taken out from nowhere? I even cross-checked with the registrar of companies to make sure that the statements which are declared by companies naturally would have it. I picked it up to see. They were declared dues by large companies. Now I can push my PSCs, I can request states, I can make sure departments pay up. I can only appeal to the industry. For all the tears that we shed for the MSMEs, my tears, your tears, can we limit the time by which the MSME will get its due? Good enough that you're putting it in your annual statement every year, but when are you marking the time to give them? I think all of us will have to do our bit and equally pull up the other for doing their bit towards the causes on which we are very, very stuck.